Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I decided that today I would start off by showing you 3 noisemakers, but one of them you have never seen before, the other 2 you have, but I brought them in anyway. This is an air horn. Now I must admit, I just picked it up yesterday, and I haven't had it that long, and I must admit I'd never seen an air horn before. And I know they use them in stadiums for ball games and football games and all of that, and people blow on them and they're very, very loud, but I never had actually seen one. So I picked this up and I'm going to play it first. It'll be loud. It's not going to be very long, but for a few seconds it'll be loud, and then I'm going to explain to you how I believe it works and why it shows how a little bit about how music is created and how sound is created. So I'll be getting into that too. So here's the air horn. I've got this part all pulled up, and now I'm going to just push it down hard and fast. That's it. Let me do it again. Okay, now what did it just do? Well, air came out of this little canister and went into this horn. This is the horn right here that you see on the bottom. This is the horn. There's no mouthpiece to it, but you can see it has kind of a trumpet-like look or a bugle kind of look. So air has to come down and it goes into this horn, and there would be in this horn some kind of a reed or something like that, a chip or something that makes sound. It's not just the air, it's hitting a reed or something, and then it just squeaks that sound. If it was a lot longer and more air, then it would sound for a longer period of time. So you might want to know, how does the air actually get in there? I'm not pulling it out, I'm not breathing it in, I'm not putting an air hose in it or anything like that. But if you take a look at this part right here, it's not particularly round. There are notches and indentations in this part. Now I can't move it, but it's there. And so as a result of the notches and the indentations, there's going to be little openings. I don't know if we can pick that up or not. There's going to be little openings beside that piece that goes in, that plastic piece that goes in. So there's always air getting into it. And it's not like someone has to pump it or anything like that. So the air gets into it, and then all I do is press it. And then when I pull it back up, then more air gets into it. It's, as I said, it's not very long, but in my apartment it sure sounds loud, and that's the way it works. But it comes, I want to show this, there's a basis we can explain something about how music works from this. Air has to be going, I'll take a recorder for this. Air has to be going in all the same direction to make a sound, to make a tone. So when you have instruments, you have a cap or something on one end. Something stops the air from going in both directions. If I take, well, I'll take this. This would be better. Here's something, it's really a fife, but it looks a little bit like a flute. And you can see, if you can catch it, this is the mouthpiece right here. It's designed to look a little bit like a flute mouthpiece. It's not very big, it's not very tall, but you can see that there is that little area that is shaped a little bit like what a flute mouthpiece would be shaped like. So if you blow in it, the air would normally go in both directions. If it was allowed to go in both directions, you would not get a tone. You really would not get a tone. You'd get the sound of air going through, but it wouldn't be a tone. In order to get tones, you have to have all the air going in one direction. So there would be a cap. If this was a real flute, there would be a little cap, or a piccolo too, on it. You can see I didn't bring a flute in because I had too much to carry, but there would be a cap, and that prevents the air from going in that direction and allows and makes the air go, all of it, go in this direction. If you're playing a clarinet or saxophone or recorder, anything like that, then your mouth acts as the cap. The air doesn't go back. You put the air in and it doesn't come back. It's all going in one direction. I have here another little fife. Here's a fife. And it was made in Massachusetts, and I have the mouthpieces right here. It's perfectly round, and you can't see it, but there is in there a piece of cork. It acts as a cap. The air can't go in that direction. It has to only go in one direction. So all of the brass instruments and all of the woodwinds and most of the woodwinds, you have a mouthpiece up to your mouth. It's either in your mouth or up to your mouth, and the mouthpiece acts as a cap so the air can't get back. So when you blow into the instrument, it all goes in one direction. And say I take this little one right here. The air is going in all one direction. How? Because I'm breathing the air into it, and my mouth closes it off so the air doesn't come back, so it's going in one direction. The same would be true of a saxophone, a clarinet, oboes, bassoons. The flute would be the only exception to this, and in the flute you have a cap right on the end of the instrument that prevents the air from flowing in one direction, and so when you blow into it, it all flows in one direction. That would also be true of the fife. So flutes and piccolos and fifes all have caps on them so that it can't go. You can't necessarily see in the smaller instruments the piece of cork or what holds it from going and what prevents it from going back. But if I see, I'm going to show you some instruments. This is a little song flute. You play it very much like you play a recorder. It doesn't have the same sound, but it operates on the same principle, and the air can only go in one direction. And I have a little penny whistle. I have many of them. I've decided to only bring one of each, and here it is. The air is only going in one direction. Your mouthpiece acts as the cap. And then I've got a little, it's like a penny whistle. It was made in England. It's called a sweet tone. And the same thing, the air only goes in one direction. Sassoon flutes. I want to mention that for most of the octaves that I'm playing on these instruments, I'm just basically adding more air and it's bouncing it up an octave. There's not a special fingering for an octave. There would be on some recorders and there would be on the flute, of course. And the fifes and everything. And even if you get to an instrument like this, and this is a melodica, and it's the same principle. The air goes in, and it's all in one direction. Your mouth acts as that cap. So you don't get air in both directions. You only get air in one direction. So when I play, use this air whistle, the air is going in that one direction. It's being pressed. You have to have moving molecules to get tones. You have to, and what you're doing is when you're pushing the air through, the molecules are moving. The louder you play, the faster the molecules are moving. And it's the same principle. Even here, it's the same principle. So this is a little noisemaker. The other noisemakers that I brought in the vuvuzela. This is an Australian instrument, and it was used for the Olympics and other kinds of stadium activities, and it makes one heck of a noise. I'm going to attempt to play it. And it has a mouthpiece that's shaped a lot like a trumpet mouthpiece, and you have to handle it about the same way. You can get 2 or 3 notes on it, and so that's the vuvuzela. They can be very loud. When you get a bunch of them in a stadium, and everyone's got one of these, then the combined sound is very, very loud indeed. But playing it singly, it's not probably as loud as what the air horn is. And then you have the sound tube, which I brought, and I have several of these of different colors. But the sound tube, it's not up to your mouth. You're not blowing at it, but you're moving the molecules around. Now, you can get that depending upon how fast you move it. You can get that to different pitches. You know, I don't know if it makes a difference. That's the only tone that I can get out of it. But if I was stronger and I could move it faster, you could probably get a higher pitch. I know that more than one pitch is available. But what's happening here is you are forcing molecules to move at various speeds, and the air is moving inside of it. And as it moves, it's making a whistling sound. Now, there's some basic physics to this, and I've gone over the physics of sound before, and I may do it again. But the physics is, the fact is, you have to have air basically in one direction, and you have to have the molecules moving at a certain speed to get different kinds of tones. And if you have an instrument, you do that just by virtue of the fact of you playing it. And when you add, if I take this one, if I add fingers, I get a lower pitch. The lower pitch comes from the fact that I'm using more fingers, because also the longer the tube, the lower the pitch is going to be. That's a basic physics principle too. And so what you do is you just let it go, and it gets longer and longer and longer, and then you get deeper and deeper tones. And the smallest amount of tubes, and of course, with a recorder, for the higher notes, you can half hold the thumb hole, which bounces tones up an octave. But the physics of sound is very interesting, and I thought I would bring that air horn in, partly because I've never seen one before. You can hear them, but I've heard them in stadiums, but I've never actually seen one. And so I want to bring it in and describe a little bit about how the physics of sound is. Okay, now I want to get to practicing and how important it is for students to practice. And I have some notes with me. If I ask a student how much they practice, they usually kind of grimace. Most people don't like to practice. I was one of those students that loved to practice. I could practice all day. I really liked doing it, to the fact that my father would stop me and say, "Pat, you're practicing so much. You need to get out and play with children like yourselves." But maybe I'm a little unusual in that way, but I really did like to practice. But most kids don't. And if you say, okay, how much are you practicing in a day? Well, let's say I practice a half an hour a day. So I want to say there's no magic number, no magic amount of time that you can spend practicing that's going to make you into a musician. And I would say that most of these students that are faithfully practicing are not getting the most out of their practice time, because it's, as I say, it's not so much the length of time for a student. It's not so much the length of time that you practice, but how you practice that gives you the gain in terms of your musicianship. Now, as you get more advanced and you play more difficult songs, you're going to be practicing more in terms of time. Your practice times are going to be longer, and they're going to be more intense, and that's going to be a natural progression, because the more difficult the songs that you play, the more you need to practice them. But I'm talking about students who have started, they know some basics about music, they are practicing, they may not be quite at the intermediate level yet, but they're getting there. How can they practice? Well, if you're a beginning student, if you're just beginning and you're just learning things about your embouchure and how to finger and the notes and things like that, how to read music, and there's an awful lot to learn in a very short period of time. You have to know how to take the instrument and put it together and take it apart without jamming it, without doing damage to it, because if you don't do it carefully, you can damage an instrument just putting it together. How to place it in the case so that it's laying flat, so that it won't bump around in the case, how to get it together, how to blow into it, how to put your hands on it, how to hold it. And you're learning all of these things at the same time. And the other thing you're learning with it is you're learning how to blow and play and make noise with it. Now, if you're a beginning student, I do not want any beginning student of mine to practice more than 5 or 10 minutes a day. And the reason that I don't want them to do it, either adults or children, is that the embouchure, which is the muscles in your mouth that you use on the mouthpiece, have to be built up and get stronger. You may not realize it, but you can get very, very tired, and your lips can get very, very sore, and your mouth area can get sore just because you don't have a well-developed embouchure. And that takes time to develop. There are muscles in there. You have to hold your mouth in a certain position. You have to hold your teeth in a certain position. You have to squeeze your mouth around it. Well, just take the recorder. Teaching a recorder. What do? Well, first of all, you got to know how to hold it. You have to know how to put your hands on it and where to put your hands on it. Then when it goes in your mouth, your teeth, your front teeth are going to be on the instrument. The bottom lip will be over the bottom teeth. And then you will kind of squeeze your mouth together on the side. But you see, you're using the muscles around your mouth, and the muscles around your mouth is not used to it. They have to get used to it, and the embouchure has to develop. If you are playing and you're a new student, and you play, say, even for 2 or 3 minutes, and your mouth gets sore, you feel kind of weak, stop it. Don't play anymore until you have rested. Now, how long do you have to rest? Well, it depends upon what you need as an individual. If you're a beginning student and you're not playing long, you may only need a minute to rest. But it's just the idea, don't use the lips. This is not a kind of thing where you play through the pain and get stronger. The more you force it when your embouchure isn't ready to take it, the more you, in the end, are going to actually weaken the embouchure, and as a result of that, you won't be able to hold a position. This is particularly true of flutes. Now, I didn't notice it so much when I was studying clarinet and saxophone, where the instrument goes actually in your mouth, and I don't notice it that much with the recorders either, where the instruments go in your mouth. But if you're playing flute, let's see, if you're playing flute and you've got your instrument like this, and you're blowing in, you have to squeeze your lips in such a way to make sure that you can. It's a little bit like blowing over a Coke bottle, but it's a very weakening embouchure. So if you have an embouchure that's not strong yet, what you're going to feel when you're you're overstressing your lips, you're going to feel your lips get weak, and they're not going to be able to hold a position, and they're going to hurt a little. I'm not talking about really bad pain, but you're going to feel weak and you can't hold a position and your lips get sore. At that point, do not play anymore for a while. I'd rather have a young student of mine play 5 minutes or maybe even 3 minutes, rest for 10 minutes, play for another couple of minutes, rest for a couple of minutes, and gradually that embouchure, which is really muscle, will develop and become stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, I have played the flute for umpteen years. I was a woodwinds instructor in a fine arts center for many years, and I played flute, but I played all the other instruments as well. And I still, once in a while, my lips will still get a little weak, and I'll stop playing just for a little bit of time, not very long, even a few seconds, and then go back to playing, and the lips go back into normal position again. So it is a tiring thing. And I would imagine, I don't play brass, but I would imagine that brass players have a lot of problems in developing their embouchures because their mouthpieces are right up against them like the vuvuzela was when I played it. And I felt some strain on my lips just playing the little that I did on the vuvuzela. The other thing I need to tell you is that if you're playing one instrument like a brass instrument, doesn't matter, trombone, trumpet, French horn, whatever, you should not play woodwinds. If you're playing woodwinds, flute, saxophone, clarinet, oboe, bassoon, whatever, you should not be playing brass. The embouchures of the instruments are different. And because they're different, you kind of nullify your main instrument by playing these others whose embouchures are different, and you weaken your embouchure, and it's harder to hold a position. So brass have an embouchure where if they go from trombone to trumpet to French horn, it's basically the same. When you're playing woodwind instruments, saxophone, clarinet, it didn't matter so much. They're basically the same. Flute's a little different because the position of the flute on your mouth, not in your mouth, but on your mouth is a little different. But when you're switching instruments, you're weakening the embouchure of your main instrument. You need to be concentrating on your main instrument, and if you need to add extra instruments, and most people do, they play more than one, then you need to play an instrument that's very similar. Like, for example, I started off as a saxophonist. And I continued that, and I trained on saxophone. It's my main instrument. Later on, I added a clarinet. And it wasn't a problem because the mouthpieces are very similar. But if I had decided to add, say, a trombone, I would have weakened my embouchure for the saxophone, and it would have been harder for me to maintain an embouchure. My lips would have gotten weak. So I was in a restaurant once, and there was a child there, and I got to talking with the parents, and the child was very gifted musically. And she was playing, I don't remember what instrument she was playing, and we got to talking about music, and her father said she would like to play a trombone too. And I said, better not, because of the embouchure problem, and I described what went on. And so they thanked me for telling him that, because they wouldn't have known. I've known some people who can play different instruments, and it's not such a problem, but for most people, to switch the type of instrument you play and change the embouchure, that's a hard thing to do, and it usually damages the embouchure for your main instrument, so I kind of need to warn you against that. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to close it here, and I'm going to talk to you more about how you should practice and how you should approach practicing and how long you should practice and the problems you might have, and how if you're getting into a rough spot and you can't quite get it, the music is a little too difficult, then how do you practice that music so you get it? It's not what you might think. Just repeating it over and over and over and over again isn't what you need to do to get past something that's difficult for you. There are better ways to practice. So I'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.